G'day. A little while ago I made up a dome-shaped support for a welding helmet that I've got, and I hope people found that interesting. Today I'm going to be making up the tubular support frame to sit underneath that so I can put that in my welding cabinet. One of the techniques that's used for joining tubes is one called fish mouthing. I'm not going to be doing that because I haven't got a fish mouthing tool, but I do have a technique which is something similar to, and so I'm going to be showing you that, plus a couple of other ways of joining tubes together that might be of interest to people, and hopefully will help you if you want to do something similar in the future. First, what do I mean by a fish mouth joint? Well, this is a very poor isometric attempt at drawing it, but it's basically a tube where you've notched out with diameter, with a hole saw or something, milling cutter, the diameter of the tube that's going to sit in there, and so you get to this sort of thing, right? So the tube sits in there, and that's like that. Now that comes up to half the diameter of the tube, and then you weld around it, and it looks very smart. It's got all sorts of strength to it, but we don't need to do that. So the key here is actually, well, once again, it's trigonometry. If that's cut at 30 degrees, that'll still come to the center line of the pipe. So instead of getting us I guess it'd be an elliptical sort of shape here, you're getting a straight line. Now, my welding is wobbly enough that you probably can't tell the difference. Slight change of plans here. This is one of those projects where it's making it up on the go, so that's not surprising. Originally I was going to cut that tube off, weld a bracket on there, and but I've realised that that's probably not the best idea because, as I said before, when you weld aluminium you're basically annealing it, and so I'm going to have a soft bracket, which I prefer not to have. So what I'm going to do instead is I've made up some little plugs, and I'm going to put those into the tube, weld those around there, then tap those and run a thread into them, so I can have a plate and do it up. It means I've need to cut that tube off. Now I can do that in multiple ways, bandsaw, hacksaw, all that sort of thing, but one question some people may have is, how do you make sure you get a nice square cut? Well, provided that the tube is round, it's not a taper, you can use this trick. This is just a bit of paper with a straight edge on it, and if you line those two edges up, because it's not conical, you actually get a well-defined line around there. So I can run around with a pencil or a texter, Sharpie, whatever you want to use, to give myself a cut line there, and that's going to be basically square to that tube. So I've cut that off. I'm going to put another fish mouth type joint here, and then mount that up here, and then I'm also going to put a strap of material around the back here, just so that I don't have the problem with the headband just hanging up on that edge. Another thing you can do with a bit of paper, I want to mark this off in quadrants. So what I've done here is I've overlapped this, and you can probably just pick that out. All right, and I've marked where the overlap is. So that's the circumference. I can now take that off, and using a scale of some sort, I can mark out where, take that number and divide it by however many I want and mark things out. Now I actually want to do it in 4, and I started marking these out, and I thought, well, there's actually another way you can do that, and that's simply to do this, and then do it again if you want 4, and each one of those marks, and for some strange reason that's not on the right spot, ignore that mark, that one is, and that one is. Strange. So each one of those marks represents a quartering of that tube, and so I can put those marks on there, and if I'm using this method, that comes in very handy, because I can then come along with a hacksaw, with a angle grinder, with a whatever cutting method you like, and just use that to line up my marks. So I don't have to have some fancy setup in a power saw to do this if I don't want to. And I guess that's one of the nice things about this particular method of doing this sort of tube to tube joint is that you can do it in the field. You don't need lots of fancy equipment to do it, whereas with the hole saw type fish mouthing, you need to have a pretty sturdy setup to do that. So this is what we're trying to do here. Okay, it's been cut off at 30 degrees from the flat, and grabbing a rounded bit of tube that will fit on there quite nicely, and as you can see, you better fill that gap without too many dramas. When you're using thicker tube, and I'd class this as thicker, it's 2mm thick and it's about 20 diameter tube, so I'll call that thicker. You may want to come in with a file or an angle grinder and just clean up the inside of those lips, because you can imagine if that was really thick, that'd be sitting out. So if you clean up those a little bit, that'll go on there and you should be able to weld that on without any dramas. So this is the end result of welding that fishtail on there, or that pseudo fishtail on there, and as you can see, you'd be hard pressed to pick the difference there between a genuine sort of fishtail and that one. That's one advantage of lumpy welds, is that they hide these things really well. Now the 30 degrees is for equal sized tubes. The method I'm using here is to cut the tube that's being joined in at 30 degrees off flat, so 120 degrees included. Now a reasonable question is, okay, how far can you take that down? This is a scale drawing, and this is 100% of that. That's 90, 80, 70, 60, 50. So you can see here that not a problem with the same size tube. You're getting pretty close with the 90% of this diameter tube. Here the actual point is further along than it needs to be, so you'd probably snip that off or maybe even go to a lesser angle. And then here I've gone down to 150 degrees for the 70, 60 and 50% of this tube diameter. Now there's also an argument that says, well, if you're going to do this sort of thing, that's fine up at the size for size, and maybe a little bit smaller down to about 75%. Once you get below that, unless you're talking very thick wall tube or something very hard to process, you might be better off just basically drilling a hole through the tube, planting the tube to be joined in there, and doing it that way. This is what I was talking about earlier. Once you start getting down in diameter, you can just put a hole in and run the tube in. So I haven't got a bit of aluminium tube, but this is a bit of 12mm rod. That's 20mm, and that'll just pop in there. But you could then weld all around there. You get a perfectly good joint, so you don't have to worry about doing any strange scalloping on the end of this. And from a point of view of strength, that with a decent weld around it is probably going to be almost as strong as a continuous tube, so it doesn't matter too much. This is another type of joint that can be used for joining tubes together, but requires a plate in the middle. And so you can imagine if you had a need to have 4 or 5 tubes meet, particularly a different angle, but they're all in the same plane, you could do this. And what you're basically doing is, I've just drilled a hole there. This is very rough, but I've just drilled a hole there, run down there with a hacksaw, clean that up with a file, and that'll just slot in there like so. And then you come along and you put a bead of weld along there. And so, as I said, you could have one there, you can have one over here, you can have one there. I'm told this used to be used for aircraft. Just for the sake of completeness, here's the 2 joints I was talking about earlier. So plate in slot, bit of weld, and that'll be quite strong enough. And this one here, I just got a bit of tube, crushed it in the vise and welded it up. So once again, a very simple one for fuel juice. This one will be quite strong this way, but of course this way won't be so strong because the section is not very thick there at all. This one's quite common on things like gates where they've got tubes. The strength that the joint gives is going to be in excess of what the gate requires, and so therefore they don't worry about it. It makes it a very easy way to fit up.
Thanks for watching. Please share with others if you like what you see, and thanks to those who've inspired me in my metalworking journey.